Welcome to The Deliberate Way. I'm Dan Seawald. I'm your host, and I'm joined today by my good friend and a thought leader in the space of academia and mental health, David Jaffe. Dave, it's great to have you here.
That's great to be here, Dan. Thanks so much.
Now, you may know this about yourself, David, but a few words about you for those who don't know you. You're the Dean of Student at American University's Washington College of Law, and remarkably, you've been there maybe a little bit longer than you might want to admit, since 1997, if I've got that right. And for the better part of this past decade, you've been on a mission to shine a bright light on the mental health and wellness issues faced by students, and more specifically, law students. And, during that time, you've spoken widely, many different conference, symposia, well sought after speaker, I might add, and you've co-authored Suffering in Silence, a survey of law student well-being and the reluctance of law students to seek help for substance use and mental health concerns. You're a contributing author to The Path to Lawyer Well-being, Practical Recommendations for Positive Change. And you're even a video star, not that star, but Getting Healthy, Staying Healthy. And I hear it's being used by many different universities for their professional responsibility classes around the country these days. So great to have you here, and I'm really excited to just dive in, David, but thanks for joining again.
Yeah, let's do it.
Well, all right, I'm going to start with this. You may have seen there was a study from the University of Michigan that was released pretty recently that says roughly 40% of students experience some level of depression, 36% screen positive for anxiety disorders, and nearly half of those students reported that they've been diagnosed with a mental health disorder at some point in their lifetime. That's pretty staggering. Are we in the middle of a mental health pandemic? What do you think?
So that's a great place to start, Dan. I think we're in the middle of a conflation of two things, and they seemingly are contradictory. But what I have seen from my perch is that we have a generation of kids, of students, who are largely more self-aware and more comfortable around mental health challenges that they may be having. They're willing to speak about it more openly. They're willing to seek help for it more openly than our generation and those prior were ever willing to do. So on the one hand, a good thing. I think at the same time, though, we are not a mental health pandemic. I think we're suffering from a social atrophy pandemic. I think that we are dealing with, again, with a generation of I keep saying kids, of students who are not as well equipped to interact, to just talk to each other. I was moved. I'm not a big name dropper, but I was moved by a recent podcast I was listening to. Esther Perel, I don't know if you listened to her, and
Sure.
Dan Harris from 10% Happier. And Esther was sharing a recent presentation that she had given, where she asked Dan about this. She said, Dan, when you were young, did you play in the streets? And he said, yeah. She asked, then proceeded to ask him, do your kids play in the streets? And he said, I encourage them to, but they don't. She said, and that's the difference. She said, our generation, we were unfiltered. We were kind of regulated. We had to learn how to talk to each other, how to fight with each other, how to make up, how to communicate. And that's not going on anymore. And as a result of it, these social skills, these interaction are just not taking place. They're being, kind of tucked into social media and other places. And I'm sure we'll talk about that. But that the students we're working with are just not having these skill sets. And that is contributing when not having the ability to communicate, to listen to somebody else, to listen to a point of view and respect it, even if one disagrees, is contributing to some of these mental health factors, because that sense of community and connection is just not there.
I mean, you're at the ground level. I mean, I hate to use the term ground zero, but you're a dean of student at law school. You see lots of students. You've been there for multiple generations. Have you seen a change in the way people engage with each other, and in the classroom, outside the classroom? What's your observation? Is that kind of reigning true for you?
I think the classrooms are pretty much a hold. I think our faculty are by and large open-minded. They're considerate of dialogue. They help promote it. I think students are generally respectful in the classroom. I happen to work at an institution that I think is to some degree leads the way in terms of supporting students and what they do inside and outside the classroom. But a lot of law schools are doing that well, also. I think the outside the classroom is the part that, as I was just alluding to, I think we still struggle with a little bit. The cancel culture. I'm not even sure if that's the current phrase that, students are using these days, but just kind of this notion of, well, since I don't agree with you in your opinion, you're clearly wrong. The inability to just
Hmm.
kind of listen. And of course, at law schools, it's critical because the whole idea is to learn how to advocate and to argue, and certainly to maintain a point of view, but also to learn and to respect that there's another point of view. You're going to be arguing across the table, in front of a judge over time. You want to be able to have an appreciation for what another side may be presenting, whether or not you're going to respect it or agree with it, understand it, and then be able to engage in that dialogue and in essence advocate for yourself or for your client, in the courtroom. Those are the skill sets we're looking to develop.
Let me wind this back for a second.
Yep.
So, for somebody who's listening in and saying to themselves, "You're a dean at a law school. You're not probably, and I'm going to make an assumption, not specifically trained in mental health counseling. Why has this issue of tackling mental health and well-being amongst law students become so important to you specifically? You've been on a crusade for a while about this, but why would a law school dean care that much about this?"
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Dan. So, I'll be candid. Mental health, depression has run in my family. My grandmother, who I adored, experienced it. My father, her son, and his sister, my favorite aunt, also experienced it. It has trickled in and out, perhaps, in my extended family to some degree. And so I think I've been aware and around it since a young age, and that has certainly informed my interests and my thoughts as I develop
Hmm.
into the profession and into the space. And then I've just had you're absolutely right. I'm not a licensed clinician. It's the old, but I slept at a Holiday Inn. I've counseled, I don't know, scores and scores of students over the years who are struggling. And what I tell them is I'm not a clinician, but we can sit and have a pep talk. And that
Yeah.
pep talk is typically about acknowledging what a student is going through, talking about some skill sets and ways that the student might be able to, work through these things. But it has just been informed time and again. We've had a couple of situations where, one famously for me, where we've lost a law student to a drug overdose, and another instance to a suicide. And I remember meeting with students afterwards, and some of them just kind of coming out and expressing some of their own issues to me. And it once again reaffirmed for me that these students need assistance, oftentimes are looking for assistance. Those who are looking for it, it's easier because they're partway there. They're like, I know I'm struggling with something. I could use
Hmm.
some assistance from you. But we also have this larger role. I'm working at one of the largest, law schools in terms of student population in the country. And a lot of students don't know that they need the help and or are fearful of getting help. And so we have to, at the same time, be proactive and find ways to get them towards a comfort level of knowing when they're struggling that it's okay to reach out to somebody.
It's funny. It triggers a thought for me. Last month, but maybe you saw this, that Elmo from Sesame Street, he posted a seemingly innocuous question on Twitter, or what was Twitter, X, and asked, "How's everyone doing?" And I don't think that our furry red friend was ready for the response. It was overwhelming, thousands of replies. In fact, I wrote down here because there were so many that were just so startling. Someone wrote, "Every morning I can't wait to get back to sleep. Every Monday I can't wait for Friday to come. Every single day and every single week of my life." I
Mm,
mean, that's Elmo. Like, I mean, obviously it's not Elmo because he
right.
doesn't really exist. But I don't want to be, kind of a killjoy. But somebody posing as Elmo and Sesame Street on Twitter got these type of responses.
Yeah.
What's going on there? I mean,
Yeah.
this is, even President Biden had to jump in, or his staff jumped in to say there are places where you can get help. If people are responding to Elmo on Twitter, it's got to say something about people not feeling like there's someone to talk to. Your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, it doubles back a little bit, Dan, on some of the things we've already been touching on. Somebody a lot more famous than me said that the opposite of depression is not happiness, but it's connection, right? And by extension,
Mm.
community. And so some of the things, again, touching on, and I'd go back even further, your parents, my parents, and our grandparents, right? They grew up in these communities together, right? The families were on the same block, the same street, the Sunday dinners, people were coming together on a regular basis. And we have over time become diffuse, right? We know that we've spread across the country, we've spread overseas. And as part of that sense of community, that insular group, whether it's family, whether it's just, friendship connections and things like that, they have also become more extended. Social media, I kind of alluded to that a couple of minutes ago.
Yeah.
Folks who are kind of believing that their happiness is going to be bred or burned by seeing what somebody else is doing. This great vacation that I just took, or this great sandwich that I just ate, and this and that. And it's not the reality, right? But we've moved out of this. Where's my foundation? Where's my core? Where's my happiness? And instead relying on other people to tell them where that happiness should be and ought to be. And people are just struggling as a result of that. I'm not surprised that, whether it's Elmo or anybody else, folks it's an opportunity for them to say, yeah, I'm struggling.
Do you your thoughts about COVID, social media? I know they both have kind of part worth scores, if you will, contributing,
Yeah.
but was COVID a big accelerator, or just kind of a blip in, is probably other forces?
I mean, they're smarter folks than me, but we are still coming out of it to a large degree. I think that it is going to affect, I think, a couple of generations of kids. We've got yours and mine had gone through high school, a tail end of high school, of college, having to kind of miss these social interactions, an opportunity to be away from their family for the first time and reconnect. And all of a sudden you get hit and you're home and you're struggling in your distance. I think that's going to still be here for a while. And to some degree, we're talking a lot about students, but we're still dealing with a society where employers are, in a hybrid modality. So individuals are not coming together on a regular basis. There's more and more work from home. There's a lot of siloing that's going to be going on as a result of that on a continual basis. And so again, that, the water cooler, right? That's what we heard growing up, the water cooler conversations. Go find a water cooler to begin with, and then find that somebody's actually, standing around it and wants to have that conversation. We're diffuse and diffuse and diffuse, and it's really contributing to these challenges.
Yeah, it's a collective dehydration. Nobody can find the water cooler or find the conversation. It is, and while companies are bringing people back and schools have brought people back, I think that sense of connection, it is lost. I think you hit on a really important point. I'm going to shift just for a moment.
Sure.
You focus on law students. We've talked about kind of the younger generation and students in general, but do you feel that law students are any more at risk for mental health issues in the general population? Or is there any research that would suggest that to be the case?
Yeah, well, I mean, some of the research, you very kindly referenced an article that I co-authored, and that was a result of a survey, actually two surveys that I had the true honor of assessing law students at the national level, 2014 and again in 2021. And law students do struggle to some degree, of percentages greater than the population at that age that is not in law school at the time. A couple of factors for it. And I don't like painting with a broad brush. I don't think it's ever helpful. But law students, as a general rule, are typically type A type personalities, right? They're competitive. They've worked hard, but a lot has come natural to them, right? And they were at the top of their class. Even with the just high volume of law students who enter each year across the country, regardless of a law school you're going to. You were near the top of your class at the college, the university you attended. And then all of a sudden you get to law school and you may not be the smartest student in your row, let alone in your classroom, right? And so, all of a sudden it's like, wow, this is, I can't wake up the night before an exam and just crash for it. I can't write a paper in 24 hours. I've got to work. And so there's some added components to it also for only a very small population of law students are going to go to have a further education beyond law school, meaning that the vast majority, this is finishing school, right? They are done, which means they're looking for employment. Law school, as a general rule, is also, tuition is high at most schools. And so you've got this kind of conflation of, I've got this debt. I may have debt from undergrad, and now I've added to it from 3 years or 4 years as a part-time student at law school, and I need to have a job to pay this down when I graduate. School is over for me. So you've got this, again, this kind of conflation of all of these things that are taking place, and it's really heady. Now, having said that, I'm gonna maybe jump a little bit beyond the question, because I find this part fascinating to a degree. We're fortunate to have an embedded clinician, meaning somebody who's working exclusively with law students here. A lot of law schools have to rely on their university, for clinicians, this and that. And the clinician, of course, is barred from speaking about any particular student, FERPA and HIPAA and everything else and whatnot, but can provide general information. My clinician has come back and told me time after time that the issues the students are presenting have very little to do with law school. Okay, what they're talking about are these deep-seated issues, family relationship issues just with others, with a significant other, and this and that. And they're coming forward, and then we are maybe to some degree the gas on the fire, right? Because you do have this high burden of reading, and these students have moved from another part of the country, and the tuition again is a big issue, and the concern about a summer job building towards post-grad and everything else. Those are certainly components that are adding to it. But at the core, what I find is that, and what I hear from the clinicians, that the students, the issues they're struggling with have preceded law school, and they're coming to the fore and coming to a head when they're with us.
Do you think you have a unique perspective, and you look plenty young for a person who's worked for 3 decades in this
Thanks.
role. But enough of the flattery. Let me be direct. 3 decades is a long time, David. It's a long time, but it also gives you that longitudinal perspective that people often don't have. What do you see has changed? You mentioned that the embedded psychologist has been able to kind of observe and give you some root cause things that they see, but it's a point in time. Pre 9/11, you were there pre 9/11. You've been there through COVID into today. A lot of things have happened in between. Has anything changed? Is it the same thing? Or what's different?
Yeah. So to the good, and I may have touched on this a little bit, or you had touched on in my intro, which I appreciated. If we were having this conversation, Dan, 2013 or prior, we probably wouldn't be having the conversation because it wasn't there. This notion of looking at, of addressing well-being issues at law schools, and quite frankly in the legal profession, was virtually non-existent. Okay, law students' ways of coping, prior to and I'll explain it in a sec, but prior to 2013 or whatever, was to go out drinking. Right, was to go out. They would go to what they called bar reviews, which was kind of a play on the bar exam you take when you graduate, but you go and review a bar on a Thursday night. Everybody would gather and drink and rail against the law school and everything they were doing, and that was their way of kind of coming together. So along comes 2014. There are these 2 surveys on well-being. One is on the law student side, and I was proud to be a part of it. But there was a similar one Hazelton Betty Ford had put out on the legal profession. And there was a lot of news and kind of hay about this within the academic setting, to be sure, a little bit outside as well. And that really started a little bit of kind of a firestorm of, okay, well, what do we want to do? Right. So we have these surveys, we have the results. Those of us who were working inside, to your point, knew that our students were struggling. We knew that the legal profession had its own hazing going on, and we can talk about that in terms of what we're expected with associates to make partner and the burnout and everything else. But nobody was really doing anything about it. And so these results of these surveys begat an interest of individuals around the country to talk about it. That created a task force on lawyer well-being, a group of volunteers who wanted to say, okay, the surveys, that's great, and we can write about it, but the so what? What are we going to do? So this task force that you referenced then developed in 2017 this lengthy report that basically called on every stakeholder in the profession, the law firms, the judiciary, the law schools, the lawyer assistance programs who help the lawyers, the judges, the law students, and kind of said, here's what you ought to be doing. Here are the spots where the bullet points where you could be making a difference, the personal, the spiritual, the financial, and really time to stop talking about it and start making some changes. At the law school level, we didn't talk at orientation about well-being. We didn't talk about the chance that a percentage of you, or the knowledge that a percentage of you were going to be dealing with depression or anxiety and having these, because we were pretty much told, don't say that. The students will go, running off the wait list to another law school, perceiving that your law school must have the issue. So nobody wanted to talk about it. That has changed. That I would dare say that there's a law school in the country that is not touching on this in one way or another, starting at orientation and then finding other ways to kind of, roll it out and continue to reinforce that there are resources and opportunities and places to get help. The legal profession, huge boat, turning ever slowly. I'm not as well steeped in there, but I've spent time. I've certainly met with attorneys. I got a number of classmates who are, in the profession. They are struggling mightily as well, but we're seeing law firms that are also taking some leads. They're hiring professional counselors in the area. They're looking for ways to address the work-life balance. The billable hour, again, we could spend an hour on that. It's probably a bottom line issue that's going to continue to plague certainly the larger law firms. But we're seeing this big boat that is taking care to look more at what they're doing internally, at what other law firms are doing, at what law schools are doing, because these students are feeding into the ranks of these law firms and really trying to start to model and slowly assess. And I think that obviously all bodes well for the hopefully not too distant future.
You just going back to something that you started with was 2013, 2014 was this watershed, if you will, moment where people came together and said, we need to work together as a community to address these issues. I know you're not an epidemiologist, but any statistics or even anecdotes off the top of your mind of why did it happen in 2013? Was there something that was bubbling to the surface that law firms and judges in the community said, we have to do something now? It seems like it's pretty dire and it's hard to get people as a community to come together.
Yeah, that's a really good question, Dan. The two, and I'm always trying to be careful here because it sounds like it's self-serving, but the student survey on the national survey on student well-being, which was co-piloted by my colleague Jerry Organ, by Kate Bender, who is part of a Dave Nee Foundation organization at Fordham, and myself. That itself had been a couple of years in the making, where a couple of individuals, the three of us and some others, were just talking about how do we get society, how do we get the legal community to appreciate these issues are here? Well, the way you do it is to survey. You've got data, right? Something to point to. If my colleague and friend Jerry were on this call, he would hear me say and smile that Jerry to me was always the data guy, and I was always the so what guy. So the data's here, but we knew what the data was going to tell us. The question was, why aren't we doing anything about it? I think what happened really, Dan, was pure confluence of circumstances. The survey that I referenced, the other one, and Patrick Krill and some others were the ones who kind of piloted that survey out of Hazleton Betty Ford. We weren't talking to each other at the time, but the results we saw were that the lawyers were the product of law school, of the students, and so the issues, the percentages around anxiety, depression were as high. They were significant. That confluence was purely coincidental, but it was the results of those surveys coming out where folks are like, we should be talking about this. This should not be a 24-hour news cycle. And some of the media picked up. Again, it wasn't above the fold New York Times. They're focused on other things. But the people in the academic, in the legal circles were like, this is time. So it was, I don't know if we could point to any one thing. I think those surveys really started things off. I think the task force, as I referenced, where a bunch of folks were like, we can't just let the surveys and the results die. Let's figure out what we want to do. The lawyer assistance programs and folks at law firms who did care, and folks like myself, but certainly other deans of students and other deans, quite frankly, of law schools. So like, yeah, why do we need to be doing this? Let's find a better way and a stronger way of supporting those in the profession. And it coalesced. It really just coalesced.
Sometimes there's just a need to actually quantify, as you said before, what people already know, but we are reluctant to see. And then when you see those numbers and say, wow, 80%, 60%, 70% are struggling with this, it becomes almost a nuclear event, if you will. We got to do something. It's going to take us all in. So I think that it certainly can't be minimized. I want to come back to something that you mentioned. It's a small point, but it's one that personally interests me, which is this idea of hazing. And anybody who's worked in a consulting firm or the big six, big four accounting firms, law firms know when you leave the the comfort, the bosom of safety in your university or grad school. Everything's great, more or less. And then you go to a firm where it's militaristic, inherently hierarchical.
Yeah.
You mentioned that point.
Yeah.
Does that contribute, or how does that contribute to
Yeah.
the mental health issues of the professionals later on who might be struggling?
Yeah. So I'm smiling as I'm listening to you, Dan. There is I don't want to say a story because the story sounds like I'm making it up. There was a situation I was in a number of years ago, and I let me do this succinctly. There was a conference taking place of lawyers, and the then president of the American Bar Association, which kind of governs, around lawyers, law schools, this and that, called for a subset of partners at those firms to get together for a couple of hours, like a mini within the conference, to sit around tables and talk about what's going on in the law firms around well-being. What are the challenges? How are law firms trying to overcome them? And what are the hiccups to those, trying to overcome? And I was invited among some others to moderate the tables. And I was specifically to me, they said, we know you're from New York. We know you're going to want to jump into this stuff. Your job is to just kind of take this stuff in and kind of let things flow. So I'm at a table and the question comes up. It's like, what do you do in the law firms? Partner across from me says, well, let me tell you what we just did. And this was according to the story being told to me. It was like a week, 2 weeks ago. We announced that there's going to be a happy hour coming up the following week at the law firm. Now I had to already stop there and say, well-being happy hour, not always the best thing, but that's not what my job was. So I let that go.
Yeah.
So there's a happy hour going. I reach out to the two associates working on this case and I say, you're going to be at the happy hour, right? Right. Yeah, we'll be there. Happy hour goes the next day. One of the associates shows up. One of the other ones doesn't. So I email that associate and say, hey, at the happy hour, you said you're going to be there. What happened? Why weren't you there? And the associate writes back to me, I forgot that my daughter had a soccer game. So I left at the end of the day to go to the soccer game. And the partner then leans back and looks at me across the table, Dan, and says, and there you go. And her there you go was, look what we did. We put together this event to support well-being and this and that. And this associate had the audacity to leave work.
It's actually a great story because it really does bring to life this idea of, hey, I think I'm helping you, but they're actually doing exactly the opposite, as you're pointing out. Like, I don't give a crap about your work-life balance. It's irrelevant to me. You should have been out there having drinks.
Right. Now, right. And so drinking is certainly a part of it. The part that and I'm an optimist ultimately, and this was a handful of years ago. I'm not saying that things have changed. I'm not saying that conversation could not be held exactly again. Were we in the same circles? But as part of this, what I hope is a positive trend towards better well-being, right? So you now have, any way you want to look at it, law students who are coming through the ranks who are going to be asking during interviews, what is the law firm doing around well-being, right? This is now a question that is starting to be okay more and more in the open, whereas formerly they would have been like afraid to ask as if they had an issue. And so they needed to know that the law firm was going to take care of them. The more law students who are asking those questions, the firms are going to have to turn around and say, what are we doing? Because now it's not selecting Dan for David because Dan raised mental health and David didn't. We also are going to have these same individuals who are working their way into the law firms. And I don't want to age out. I'm not saying that it's older attorneys, but if we talk about the timeline you and I were discussing, the more senior associates partners we're used to, the understanding was you put in the hours. If you got a call as an associate on a Friday afternoon, I'm sorry, but you're staying. If you got a call during your child's birthday party on a Saturday, you have to come into the office. You're expected to do it. And I'm not saying that's all gone, but I think what I'm hopeful that we're going to start to see is this trend towards this doesn't cut it anymore. And it's not enough. I've had thrown back at me. I mean, to be fair, I've had, partners that say, well, Jaffe, as long as you keep having this, huge volume of law students that you accept into your school, you're going to keep churning out lawyers. We don't need to do anything other than what we're doing, because if Dan wants to step aside and do something else because it isn't right for him, Sally can come in and take that spot. And I'm like, well, that's not the, the thinking you want. And even from a business model, I mean, look at it inside the amount of money you're going to spend to onboard another individual. I mean, set aside even the community side, it's not even good for the bottom line. So these conversations, again, are being held more and more. They're rising to those levels. And I want to be fair for any senior associates partners who are listening to this. I'm not criticizing. A lot of you are taking care. I've met with some of you. We need to see more of that on an ongoing basis.
I'm going to lean in for a moment, and I'm going to play the role of the contrarian just to build on this.
Sure.
I've had more than a few people who've worked in the legal or still work in the legal profession, friends and family who've said, you know, the resources and the responses that they're seeing now to the mental health crisis, it's nice, it's important, but it's overdone.
Mm.
Meditation, yoga, safe spaces, it's too much. We're pandering to a weaker, more fragile generation, and what they need is tough love. What do you say to that? Because that is being said. That
Yeah.
is an undercurrent. People are saying it in backroom conversations. They may be embarrassed to share it more broadly, but they're saying it. What do you
Yeah.
think?
My mind jumps to, I don't know if this will be directly responsive, Dan, but my mind, if so, let's pick on a partner. I'm a partner working down the hallway, and I see a colleague of mine who must have broken their leg or something because they're in a cast and they're doing their best to come across. I'm going to be thoughtful about that individual. I'm going to, how are you doing? Is there anything I do to support? That sucks. I'm sorry you had to go through it. Um, Mental health issue, hidden issue. But if we were able to, if that person was walking down and they, somebody with a mental health challenge somehow had a sign or an indicator that they were there, partner's going to keep walking. Well, that's not me. And boy, that person's got to have some problems, this and that and whatnot. I don't, I don't believe, I believe that you're hearing what you're hearing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think being, attentive, sensitive to these issues is a match for being light on individuals. I think it's just a matter of really everything we've been talking about. It's having conversations, it's being part of community, it's being supportive of individuals. Look, we all have mental health challenges, right? Every person
Mm-hmm.
working the earth has it. It's on a continuum. It's a matter of how challenged we are, and the resources and we support have it. So yeah, do you need to be, should a law firm be reviewing itself at the end of the year and saying, well, we did yoga once a month and we provided mindfulness meditation to those who did it, so we've done our job? No, that's not what it's about. It's about building community. It's about maybe looking at the billable hour and finding ways to adjust it. It's about providing support for families that are in development so that mothers or fathers aren't leaving because they have care and concern about raising a family, but they can't do it in the face of what's going on. There is space to work without having to feel like you're turning into some kind of, soft organization, because it's not what you're doing. You're actually
Mm-hmm.
supporting. And quite honestly, supporting the individuals is making them stronger and allowing them to attend to the clients and to the needs that are there by helping to minimize these distractions that, otherwise creating these issues.
Now, let me kind of drill down this a little bit further. When you think about who's getting it right, I'm sure there might be some great exemplars out there of like who's doing this really well. Universities, organizations that you would point to as models that are worth copying. Who would you point to if somebody were to ask you, David, we're working on building this ourselves.
Yeah.
Who should we copy? What would you point to?
Yeah. I love to brag about our law school, but I'm never going to say we're the best law school in the country that's doing all the right things. There are other law schools that I'm modeling occasionally things after. We've got a listserv of deans of students who get talk to each other on a regular basis and look for best practices. There are in the legal space, because I don't know if you're asking me, I don't know if I'm going to name names per se.
Yeah.
There's a well-being pledge that the American Bar Association, or through the American Bar Association, has been afoot for a number of years, and this has allowed signatories to show that they are modeling good behavior around these pillars of well-being, of spiritual support, financial support, physical kind of support, whatever it might be. There are about 225 signatories to it, so that number is actually kind of blowing up to a point where those who are working at the back end want to ensure that this isn't just another kind of like a rubber stamp and then it's actually taking place. But there are law firms, there are schools, certainly, beyond ours, that are making contributions. I would say for anybody who's looking to model, if they're really interested,
Yeah.
follow up with me offline. And if you're a law firm, I'll put you in this direction. If you're a law school, I'll talk to you, put you in another direction. There's a lot of work. Again, I'm an optimist, and the trend I think is going well. There's a lot of good work going on in that regard.
Now, I've got one more question for you, and then I've got a quick game I'd like for us to play together, and I'll tell you about that game in a moment. But
Sure.
something in a previous conversation that you had mentioned to me, before a prospective lawyer can be admitted to the bar, they have to answer a question something along the lines of, do you have any condition or impairment that might affect your ability to practice law? And mental health conditions are specifically included in this question. First of all, clarify if I misstated this at all, but is this a problem or a deterrent for people becoming lawyers? And maybe elaborate a little bit more about this. I thought this was an interesting issue.
Yeah, well, thank you for re-raising it.
Yeah, absolutely.
If we find another hour to do a session together, I think I could probably spend the entire hour on this. This is actually an area that I've devoted a lot of advocacy over the last, again, probably 10 years or so. But let me try to nutshell it. Law students, when they graduate, sit for the bar exam, licensing exam. Part of that is a character and fitness component. Applicants need to answer a series of questions. Those questions are derived from each jurisdiction. So every state in the country, DC, American Samoa, can decide what questions they want to ask. Some of them pull from a certain centralized service, so there's the same questions, and any of them can choose to form their own. There are a number of jurisdictions that continue to ask questions around mental health and condition or impairment, the question that you kind of quoted. Do you have any condition or impairment, including but not limited to mental health or substance use, which is sometimes, if left untreated, sometimes not put in there, might affect your ability to practice law in a competent manner. And it's a compound question. It's a difficult question, but it is a question that we know from the results of the surveys that we assess the law students on, that a significant number of law students believe that their mental health, that they have a far better chance of getting admitted to the bar if their mental health and or their substance use issue is hidden. And so as a result of that, oftentimes their notion is, I'm not going to get help while in law school for these issues because I'm going to have to answer this question. And if I answer it in the affirmative, I may get delayed or denied admission to the bar. Now, the bar examiners will say the numbers are infinitesimally small. We're not going to delay or deny. And I'm like, well, okay, then why ask the question? Allow us to double down in law school and say to the students, you should not fear this question. Get help in school. The bar examiners will say, of course, we want the students to get help in school. And I'll say, yeah, but you're asking this question and they don't know what the results of that question are going to be. And so we've gone round and round. To the credit of a number of states and jurisdictions, they have seen this problem. They've seen the results of the survey. They've seen some of the articles that have been written, and many of them have been rolling back these questions. They've either removed the questions altogether, kind of the A state as we call it, or in some cases, and I support this, they focus on conduct and behavior. So have you exhibited any conduct or behavior that might reflect upon your ability to practice law in a competent manner? Now, if you have exhibited some kind of conduct or behavior, and as part of that, it might have been a mental health challenge you were going through or a substance use issue, if you choose to, as kind of mitigation or defense, not only respond because you have to in the affirmative, but kind of say, here's what was going on, I will support that through the bar examiners, that there's maybe further appropriate inquiry in terms of, we want to know a little bit more. Are you presently getting help for it? And if you haven't gotten help for it and it's a first time acknowledgement, there may be space and a need for some either provisional admission, what we call conditional admission, having that individual get some of the further help they need so that they can properly represent the clients in the jurisdiction.
Any precedent of people being denied from the bar for simply admitting they had a substance abuse or mental health?
There have been, so with the jurisdictions, the jurisdiction has two options. Three. They can either up or down, just thumbs up, thumb down if that's two. The other one is that they can have what's called conditional admission, where they can say, on the basis of what you've provided to us, we think you ultimately can be, we think you're competent as a lawyer, but there's some concerns we have. We're going to conditionally admit you into our jurisdiction. The public doesn't know. You don't have an asterisk on it, but you are going to be getting monitoring in the background for a period of time. Could be up to, a year and a half. Some say 5 years. This is something that's actually currently also being debated. But you're going to be going through support and counseling and some monitoring in some cases, at the end of which we hope at the time designated that you're in essence cleared and that conditional admission is lifted and you're fully admitted to the bar at that point in time. But that's a lot of information for a law student to be looking ahead and saying, I don't want to go through all this. And so I'm going to put my head down. I'm not going to get any help for this potentially growing mental health challenge. And I'll just wait until I get to a profession and hope that I can get some help while I'm there. And that's just not the way that this, ought to be operating.
Speaking of purely theoretical, if I were in those shoes, I probably would say, You know what? Plausible deniability. I wasn't sure that I fit this, so I'm just going to
Yeah,
say
yeah,
no. Why
yeah.
why invite a hailstorm of problems? Well, I think great topic, great issue. Maybe for another hour we will go a lot
Yeah,
deeper into that.
love to.
But for now, first off, thank you for a great conversation. You're not done yet though,
Okay.
because the second round is a little bit of a game I like to play called myth or reality. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to present you a statement. I'm going to ask you to think about it and then tell me, do you think it's a myth or is it a reality?
Fair enough.
And I'll ask you to elaborate a little bit on your answer. So, in no particular order, I'm going to throw out some questions or statements that is to you. You ready?
Go for it. Yep.
All right. Number one, mental health issues are a result of personality weakness or character flaws, and people can just snap out of it if they try hard enough. Is that a myth or a reality?
Yeah, that's a myth. That's an easy one. These
All
are,
right, that was a little bit
yeah, yeah,
of a slam dunk, but
and
tell me.
I mean, not a dumb question because there are perceptions out there, and I have been party to them. You know, people very close to me. Why can't that person just get out of bed?
Yep.
Just get out of bed. I'm like, really? And do you think the person wants to be in bed all day? Do you think that person wants to live a life that way? These are again deep seated. You know, oftentimes just genetically based, and it's a disease at the end of the day. And yeah, absolutely.
I'm going to go into maybe a little bit more of one that dovetails to something you said before: binge drinking. Binge drinking is a big problem for law students, and it's a canary in the coal mine. Or, in other words, not simply a rite of passage for students just blowing off a little steam. Is it a big problem? Myth or reality?
Yeah. I'm going to go with meality on that one. I'm going to go somewhere in between. I
Ah,
know it's
you're a
binary,
fence sitter.
but
Tell me, why is it a reality?
there are surveys that indicated that there are a significant number of students who were reporting that they had been binge drinking, right? We kind of broke it out for men or women, the kind of the amount of drinking, how recently that, the prior month, how much they've been drinking. And the numbers were at the time were fairly significant. We actually, interesting as a parenthetical, the survey in 2021 showed a decrease in binge drinking, but we actually had to account for COVID, where binge drinking is oftentimes being done in group settings, and that really wasn't taking place. So on the one hand, we wanted to say the results of the 2014 survey and folks starting to think about, best practices and educating students in this as we be helpful, but we really had to couch that in terms of, was it actually a case, or was it COVID that was putting this on it? So yes, on the one hand, there is binge drinking that is still a serious issue, the so-called canary in the coal mine. I also think that students sometimes are looking for something to come together, and they don't go bowling, or they may go to bowling where they've got drinking as well. Students aren't typically coalescing around a Panera or, ice skating or something that doesn't have drinking at it, because it's still, it's part of society. And I also should say, folks would have to know me better, but I'm not, I support drinking, like anything else, in moderation. I support adult drinking. I support responsible drinking. It's just when these issues are spilling over, either conflating with mental health issues or really giving way to substance use disorders and challenges, and not simply something that is entirely within the individual's control.
Oh, good clarification. All right, I'm going to throw out one that's going to hit at your core. The legal profession disproportionately attracts people with underlying mental health conditions. Is that a myth or a reality?
Yeah, I disproportionately. No, I think it's a
Tricky
myth.
one. Admittedly, a
Yeah,
very tricky one.
yeah, I think it's a myth, but I think we touched on this in a different way earlier. I
Yeah.
think that the type of individuals who oftentimes graduate to law school and then the profession oftentimes brings out some of these attributes about the individuals that can give way to mental health challenges. I don't think that's their lawyers per se. I think it's that type personality, the kind of competitiveness that runs in, kind of into something else. Oftentimes I learned how to go it alone. I was able to do this all on my own, and I was an achiever. I was a superstar, never needed any help. And all of a sudden I'm struggling over something. And this notion of getting help, of reaching out, is entirely new, and then being compounded by some of the other things that we talked about. So we may attract individuals into the legal profession who have found anew the space or the desire or potentially the need to address some of these challenges. But I don't think the legal profession is kind of alone in that regard. And I don't think we're
Yeah.
doing the single
Fair,
attraction.
fair point.
Yeah.
All right. Keeping a job like being a lawyer is too stressful for individuals with mental illness issues.
Yeah, and that's just a flat out myth. Where jobs are attainable with anybody with mental
Mhm.
health challenges. Obviously, they can get extreme, and that's why the EAPs, right, the assistance programs are important. The community, the support, and all those type of things are important. But the yeah, no, that
I'm going to
myth, myth.
move to the next one, which is law firms today are good at accommodating employees who have underlying mental health issues. Is that a myth or a reality?
I, so we spent the bulk of time talking on it. I think it's a I think it's a. I want that in between again, Dan. I'm sorry. I know it's supposed to be one or the other, but I think because we're trending again. If you'd asked me a question a number of years ago, I'd say we're doing a poor job. We're doing a poor job at law schools, not just blaming law firms. But it's been getting better, and so I think we're somewhere in the middle. You know, the
Mhm.
EAPs are there. I had referenced earlier, and I had said professional counselors, but I really meant were individuals. I mean, they've got counseling, but also individuals who are being hired to um, to develop well-being programs, like just have the programming, because the associates, the lawyers, the HR departments are saddled with other things they need to do. But to have somebody who's ensconced and kind of thinking about how do we go beyond yoga, beyond mindfulness meditation. I mean,
Mhm.
ideally, when I've been asked at law firms what can be doing, I'm like, here's a simple one: survey your law firm, ask them, do it anonymously, but ask them, what could we be doing better? You're going to have to move past the billable as the bottom line, because that's what most of them are going to say, but they're going to move towards work-life balance and listen to what they're saying. If they're allowing you, if they're suggesting fold in some pro bono hours that can be counted towards my billable, or community service so that I'm taking care of a little bit myself, do that. Listen to what they're doing. Don't just pay lip service to it.
Do employers have a right to know if a future employee suffers from mental health issues that can affect their job performance? It's a myth or reality, but it's maybe a little
Yeah,
bit
that's
more
a yes, no
subjective.
question. The answer is no.
Yeah.
No, and
No,
employers
they
don't have
don't.
a right to know. The Americans with Disabilities Act specifically kind of indicate, as you know, under the heading of disabilities, a prospective employer does not have the right to know about that.
Last question for you.
Yeah,
Most universities don't have the staff or resources to meaningfully deal with these mental health issues that are faced by students. Most universities. Would you say that's a myth or reality?
the reason I'm hesitating, Dan, is
Yeah.
that the we have seen an explosion. It's almost coming full circle. So kudos to you for that. Full circle to this conversation. We have seen an explosion in um, desire, support for services, for resources, right? Both owing to potentially to the self awareness. Hey, now I recognize this is something I can be okay about. It's not stigmatizing. I think it's the
Mm.
first time in the conversation we're using stigma, but I can move past the stigma. Now, what I do about getting help, and also those who are just struggling and maybe not self aware, but getting dragged towards those resources. The resources are in place for most universities. What a lot of universities are struggling with now is catching up with this explosion in the support needed. So you might be offering 4 sessions per student, maybe per year, and the student needs 6 or needs 8, but you're like, we need to refer you out or provide something else because we need to create space for the next student coming in. So
Hmm.
the core is in place. The question is whether this is becoming a priority in the universities, right?
Yeah.
Exactly, as
How
things
much are
are
they leveling up
stepping
in
up.
what they're doing? Yeah,
Exactly,
that's
exactly.
very great clarifications. Not easy myth or reality questions. They
Yeah,
were
well,
somewhat intentionally dichotomous. First of all, thank you for playing along. Great insights. I really just learned so much from this conversation, just hearing from you, David. I'm going to ask you, last thought.
yeah.
If you were to give advice, whether it's to students or well, let's think about a future student that's thinking about law school. Maybe they struggle or have struggled with mental health issues. What would you recommend? What advice would you give to that kind of hypothetical person that's
Yeah.
listening or could be listening in a year's time and they wanted to get your advice?
Sure. Well, the first one you just said, if they wanted to get my advice, have them come find me. I mean, I don't care where they're applying to law school. I don't care where they're at law school. I don't want to denigrate my fellow deans of students, because there are tons of them who are doing wonderful work, and they ought to go to that individual as well. But I am happy, you know, anytime that I could support a student who's moving into that space. The other one, and we threaded this during the conversation, Dan, is start talking about it, right? You don't have to be a billboard. You don't have to be blasting it, but talk to the people who are close to you, connect with other individuals, and start to have that conversation, because that connection, the absence of that connection is what's feeding into some of the mental health challenges in many instances, not across the board. The ability then to overcome that is sometimes simply talking about it. Among other things, you're actually going to pal with somebody. I mean, it might be a family member, those sometimes are a little bit more difficult, but somebody you're close to who would be like, I didn't know you were struggling. I had a classmate, Dan, I'll share this real quick. A classmate, I graduated in 93 from this law school. I had a classmate come to me 2 years ago, who's been an on and off again friend, in and out. And he said, I want to meet with you. We met at the law school. He had retired. He was sharing that he retired. And he said, I want to do some work in this space. And he said, I got to tell you, David, he said, I struggled with anxiety and depression more than anybody I knew while I was in law school. And I looked at him and my eyes went wide. I said, you're kidding me. I said, how did I not know this? He said, well, we didn't talk about it. And so this, it's the talking about it, and we're getting there. I know I keep saying that, but the more individuals are talking about it or saying this is not, if I had a broken leg and I needed help, I would reach out for it. Why would I not reach out around a mental health challenge that I'm having? Let's move past this. Let's find it acceptable to be talking about these issues. So it's connecting. It's finding somebody to connect with. I mean, ultimately, if it's a deeper issue, you want to find a professional counselor. You want to get connected. You want to find the resources for that. But start it with a conversation. Find out that you're not alone in that. And even with kind of feeling that kind of the support, the symbiotic nature, kind of pairing with somebody is gonna do strides for you.
Great words of wisdom, David. Thank you for sharing, being on the program. And we're going to link in here some resources that maybe you've recommended, a couple of the things that you've worked on that would be great resources for other people. So be on the lookout, folks, for those things that are going to be linked right to this podcast and also to our videos. David, for me and from all the work that we've done with you, thank you very much again for being on here. It's a real pleasure and an honor to have you on.
Well, Dan, I really appreciate the space that you're working in and the folks that you've been bringing together. So thank you in turn. I appreciate the opportunity.